I was fortunate to have a fantastic team there that navigated through that, fantastic business partners. And it was quite the journey. It was very, very difficult, but I think that was probably for me the kind of the defining moment that I love transformation. I love the hard work, both, from a relationship perspective, as well as the analytics, the driving perspective, to reach goals, especially cost reduction goals. And, that's when it kind of cemented is like, this is my expertise within sourcing and procurement is transformation.
Welcome everyone to Smarter Sourcing. My name is John Pavia, and this is our second season of Smarter Sourcing. It's now 2025, and this is our first installment. We thought we'd do something a little bit special. We're here in South Florida at the Miami office of Apollo Global Management. Everybody knows Apollo. They're one of the largest, most respected and successful asset management firms in the world. They manage everything from mega sovereign wealth funds to pension funds and large endowments around the globe. So we thought it would be interesting to come here and speak with Apollo's operating partner in charge of strategic sourcing and procurement, Johnathon Baker, or as he's known around here, JB. I've known JB for a long time, and he's got some very interesting insights into the craft of sourcing and procurement. He has an equally interesting background in his journey of how he got here, and he has some very interesting views on where he thinks both the craft of sourcing and procurement is going and just the private equity industry now that we're post the election. So I hope you enjoy the conversation with JB, and let's get to it. So Johnathon Baker, operating partner at Apollo Global Management, head of strategic sourcing and procurement. Thanks for doing this.
Yes, sir. No, thanks for having me. This is great.
And so all our viewers know, you go by JB, right?
JB, yeah.
JB.
Yeah.
You and I have spoken before. And I had a laugh because I saw you have an Oura ring on. You're at Apollo, you've got 800 billion under management, and you got almost 200 portfolio companies. So what is the point of it? I mean, when do you get to sleep?
Yeah, I love analytics for sure. And it tells me I don't sleep enough. That is for sure. But I get the time in when I can. But yeah, I mean, it's a demanding job, but it's very rewarding.
It's a huge job.
It is.
How are you adjusting? Now you've been here a while, but now more recently to Miami. How are you adjusting to Miami?
So far, so good, especially with the weather up north. I mean, it's brutal up there, and it's 70s down here. So far, so good.
So we're going to get into the job itself, but I first want to start with your history a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just as interesting. But I gotta, it cracks me up looking at your history, because my first question is, you're there in Ohio, you play every sport. If someone were to tell you, so you're going to maybe not end up, but at some point you're going to be head of procurement and strategic sourcing at one of the biggest asset management firms in the world. I know your first response would be at 17 years old, be like, what's procurement?
Yeah, right.
But
yeah.
what would you have said, even, early on in college, if someone told you that?
Yeah.
Is that something you would say, yeah, I can see myself doing that?
I probably wouldn't have believed it at that moment in time.
Right.
Being in small town Ohio and just the experiences I'd had up to that point. But it's interesting how careers go. I mean, just one thing leads to another, and I've always had a big appetite, and been fortunate to work for great companies, and it's led to this. And this is the final role in my career for sure. I don't know where you go from a role like this, from a sourcing perspective. Like going back to an individual company would be so boring at this point.
I want to ask about that.
Yeah.
Thinking back now, did you detect, or should you detect anything in yourself that said, you know what, I would be, now looking back, I was a natural for that job, because and I'm going to take a guess, you were really good at negotiating yourself out of trouble, or negotiating yourself into a situation, even at a young age, that just being quick on your feet and creative.
Yeah, 100%.
Give me a trouble one.
And I think, yeah, I mean, I've had many, although my mother would tell you I can't lie because she can read me so well. But it's negotiating my way out, especially with my brother. I had an older brother growing up, so you can imagine, it's just the two of us. We got into a lot of trouble that we had to negotiate ourselves out of. One quick example is the burning of a couch.
Oh, this would be good.
So my dad was an old school disciplinarian. The couch was set fire in the garage. And my dad would set a timer, and every 10 minutes, he'd spank both of us until one of us confessed. And I did not do it. My brother did it. And by God, I was not going to confess with that. So negotiating.
Did you give your brother up? Did you give up?
We gave each other up.
Oh, you did?
He said, I did it. I know he did it. But I'm like, look, we can keep getting these whippings. So I negotiated with my brother on that one. It's like, we can keep getting these whippings all night. You know you did it. I'm never going to admit to something I didn't do. So we'll just keep getting these whippings until you finally admit it. And he caved eventually. But yeah, I mean, it's just I think what I love about sourcing is it's not one dimensional. So I think you have to have an incredible learning agility, because if you do sourcing right, you're supporting many different categories. So you really have to understand the essence of those categories, how to assess suppliers, how to assess the strategy as it relates to the company strategy, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of like learning agility, analytics is involved in it, but also you have to be able to manage your own emotions. Contract negotiations can get highly emotional. Negotiating internally for, as an example, preferred supplier that the business partner wants versus what you know is the right supplier for the business. There's like an emotional maturity that you need within sourcing as well. So it taps into many different aspects of you as an individual and many different aspects of business.
So you played sports in high school. I think you played like 4 different sports. Yeah. Which one was your favorite?
Football is always my favorite. So I like football, basketball, baseball were my 3 main sports. Football is my favorite because there's a lot of, if you do it right, there's a lot of strategy involved with it. There's a lot of grit and determination involved with it as well.
And you're a linebacker?
I was a linebacker and I was a running back in football. Small school, so you had to play both ways.
But linebackers read and react, right? I mean,
read and react.
And so you got to think on your feet.
Yep.
So I would imagine there's moments where you think to yourself, that's what I'm doing today. You got to read and react.
It is, yeah. And then from a running back side, there's a lot of creativity.
Yeah.
So you're creating and people have to read and react to you, where in the linebacker, it's the opposite, right? So you do both of that actually in this work. There's a lot of read and reacting to business environments, different, especially commodities that will rise and fall. So you have to read and react and what kind of agreements you need to put in place, the length of the agreement, so on and so forth, the flexibility within the agreement. And there's some things you can dictate, like, do you really need that commodity versus is there a substitute that you could use? So preparing for a variety of different scenarios that you can adapt accordingly, I think is a critical component to sourcing as well.
And what side of Ohio were you on? Were you on the Browns, Cleveland side, or were you?
Yeah, I was a Steelers fan.
You're a Steelers, so
yeah. Ohio State fan, just won the national championship.
Yeah.
Happy about that.
Yeah.
My father went to Ohio State.
Who was your linebacker, though, that was like your guy on the Steelers? Lambert, or was that?
It was Lambert, 100% growing up. It was Jack Lambert.
So I went to
Kent
school.
State, Ohio boy.
Yeah. I went to school at Duquesne, and he would come to the gym that I was working at, and he played racquetball, and he'd hear these screams coming out. Whoever was playing as he was losing, you just hear this maniac screaming.
Yeah.
And that was Lambert.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
What is it about the Ohio Valley? And I, as I was looking at your background, I'm not from that area, but I went to school there. And it's amazing to me today that area of the country is almost like it's a bellwether for so many things. Like It's a bellwether for talent. It's a bellwether for technology nowadays, still for manufacturing, but also the people that come out of that area. They're some of the best talent that comes out of the Ohio Valley area. And I have my theories of why that is, but have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think good old-fashioned values, I think. Incredible work ethic I've noticed from people from Ohio. Honestly, there's not a lot going on in Ohio, at least where I was from. So, you have to create your own fun and you have a lot of extra time to do the studying and things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly, I think the values is a huge thing.
I agree.
I think it's the family values brought up the right way. There's not, outside of the big cities, not a lot of wealth. So you just had to really work to make your way. in the world. So I think it's created on the foundation of values and just incredible work ethic. I think you find from a lot of people from Ohio.
So I've interviewed quite a few people for this podcast, and folks who are at Fortune 100 companies, and everything in between, right? And very small companies. And what's amazing to me is 90% of the people who end up in sourcing and procurement, that was not their plan.
Yeah.
When they were in school. It sort of was yours though, a little bit, right?
It was, yeah.
How did you say, yep, that's what I want to major in.
Yeah.
At Bowling Green.
Yeah, interesting. So I worked my way through school at UPS. I was working on the docks.
So a union?
I was in the Teamsters.
Yeah.
And then I was promoted into management. So I was in management. So I changed my degree. I was going to be a football coach and teach business because I always loved business, the competition aspect of business, the intellectual side of business. So my initial plan is business education, and I wanted to be a football coach. Working my way through UPS, I got promoted. I thought my career would be with UPS. I mean, that's a great company. It's a great potential career. So I switched my major to manufacturing operations. While taking that course load, there was a procurement class as a part of that. And when I took that class, I'm like, this is what I'm meant to do. That just resonates. There was something that just hit me in taking that course. I just love the analytical side of it. It's not just like going car shopping and you're buying. Everybody thinks sourcing is easy. I bought a car, I bought a house, and they think it's easy. But to do it right, there's a lot of analytics that goes behind it. Really understanding optionality, what's driving costs, what's really needed, what's the attribution of what you're buying, so on and so forth. But I just love the analytical side of that. I loved how it touched all aspects of business, because you're literally supporting anybody that buys something from a third party, you're supporting. So you really need to understand the essence of that function. And I like the competition side. I like the negotiation side. So it just completely resonated when I took that course. And I just knew that this is what I was meant to do.
And back then, there wasn't a lot of schools offering anything in the sourcing procurement.
There was not.
Management.
There was not.
Those were business school courses.
Yeah.
Right.
So I added that as a degree, but because I had the experience in manufacturing and operations, I went to Motorola first, knowing that I wanted to get into procurement. They had won the Procurement Medal of Excellence, and so I thought it would be a good training ground for me. And then things kind of
but I want to go back to UPS. So were you ever on the truck?
Yeah, I was loading the truck.
You were loading.
The good thing is when you're not the good thing. The bad thing I would say is when you're in management. If your sort misses packages, you're the one that's delivering that package. So ultimate accountability.
How many packages do you have to deliver?
I learned really quickly to have fallback plans and double checks and things of that nature. So there wasn't a package left. But I would say in the beginning, at least once a week. But I would say month 2, there was none. It's once in a blue moon, I would have a package I would have to deliver.
It's amazing to me how I had 1,000 different jobs from like 17 to 20 something. Yeah. And to this day, it's amazing how I worked for a moving company one summer. The worst job ever in the history of the world. Yeah. But the things that I learned on doing that job were amazing. So now you get your degree and then you go in, and this is something I was thinking about. I was looking at your background. How did the reality of being in the business world, doing sourcing and procurement, how much did it align, or how much was it different from what you anticipated when you're in school learning about it from an academic standpoint? Because I'm a law degree, and when I was convinced I was going to quit law school because I was like, this is I hated it. I hated law school. And everybody kept telling me it's so different when you get out. And it was. Yeah. But for you, what was it like for you when you got out? Was it what you expected? Was it very different? Was it better? Was it worse?
Honestly, I thought it was better than I anticipated. So I moved from, I was at Motorola for 1 year in manufacturing cell phones, which was a great training ground as well. Lean Six Sigma, whole 9 yards. First opportunity I got into a procurement role. And it was largely how I expected, except for the pressure. The pressure of time, the pressure of getting that last, penny because you need to get a product down to a certain cost, so on and so forth. So the work itself was what I expected. All the analytics behind the work, the negotiations, the supplier management and leveraging suppliers to design product. I mean, all of the different aspects were exactly what I thought they would be. But the pressure, the pressure on timing, on, this contract has to be done at this, it expires here, you have to have it done here, on, you're at 15 cents, you need to get that down to 10. It's like, and so I would say the work was what I expected. It was just the pressure and the intensity of it was probably more than I expected. But you adapt. You learn to adapt and do what you need to do to be successful for your company.
And I don't want to spend the entire time on your background because we could spend a couple hours on that. We'll be out of time. But you spend time at Starbucks, at Delta, at Safeco. All companies where not private equity firms, not asset management firms. So you've got one client, you're the company you're working for. But still, out of those companies and those experiences, I know they all had a cumulative effect in preparing you for this job.
Yeah.
But if you had to pick one or two, where you look back and you say, man, thank God I had that job. I had this mentor. Was there one in particular you say to yourself, man, I was lucky that I was teamed up with so-and-so or had that job?
Yeah, I would have to say Starbucks would be the one that was the biggest. It was so it was my second CPO role at Starbucks. I went in 2009, the depths of the recession. Starbucks found religion in cost reduction. It was all about growth previously. Minus double-digit comps when I started. So we had to take cost out of the business in order to invest in growing again, because we were actually calling stores at that point in time. So coming in, I had had a great boss in Peter Gibbons who led all of supply chain, was able to work closely with Howard Schultz, who I just learned a ton from. So navigating that situation, I took relationship management to a whole new level, given Howard's direct relationships with some of the key suppliers. It was very difficult, especially when the costs of those suppliers were so much higher. When you do should cost models, so much higher than they should be. It's so much higher than what the market would say that those products should cost. And so navigating that with Howard, having Howard be a part of the solution, collaboratively with the business that is very core to Starbucks. Because little known fact, but the food product is designed and manufactured by the partner. Starbucks will have input, but the creativity and the recipe, so on and so forth, that is the suppliers. So given that, it's a very critical relationship. So taking cost out while trying to improve product is a very difficult proposition. But that was the challenge at Starbucks. I was fortunate to have a fantastic team there that navigated through that, fantastic business partners. And it was quite the journey. It was very, very difficult, but I think that was probably for me the kind of the defining moment that I love transformation. I love the hard work, both, from a relationship perspective, as well as the analytics, the driving perspective, to reach goals, especially cost reduction goals. And that's when it kind of cemented is like, this is my expertise within sourcing and procurement is transformation. I knew I always gravitated towards it, but that cemented my love for it, I would say.
So, it's funny, and I know people at Starbucks now, it's in my opinion, it's part of the problem now, in that they've got away from what I think their culture was, both in the way they treat the customer, but also, and this, I'm going to relate it back to just what you do in general, and what every, professional procurement person does. And that is they have vendors that are so vital to their success.
Yeah.
And and this is the balancing act that you have to do every day. But in a company like Starbucks, you need your vendor partners to, you're driving hard bargains with them, but you also got to show them a lot of love and treat them with respect, because they can make the difference between, a customer experience being positive versus being terrible.
Yeah.
And so that's something that, when did you learn that? How early on did you realize, right, it's great to be a great negotiator, but your valued partners, vendors, but you gotta make sure you don't alienate them.
Yeah, I mean, I think transparency helps, and creating value for them when you can. And what I mean by that is, instead of just a holistic relationship where they control everything and it's just kind of a cowboy negotiation, if you will, just on doing some benchmarking and trying to drive down the lowest cost, you really understand all aspects of the cost and where do you have leverage in the chain versus them. So for example, we bought a ton of dairy. If you look at all the food product, we buy a ton of sugar, things of that nature. So there were cases where we would do a direct deal and allow them to buy off of our deal, which would benefit them. So when you really have that transparency, you can leverage whoever's best positioned within the chain to benefit everyone. And then it was just about, okay, what's the formula? What's the cost of the formula? Do you need more chocolate chips, less chocolate chips, like those types of things? And it's not about, the cost aspect of it is very transparent. So I think the more transparency that you can have, the more you can leverage the strength within the supply chain and then set them up for success. Because we wanted the very best products, because costs paled in comparison to revenue. What we were ultimately looking to drive is revenue. There's pretty good profit margins, obviously, in food products and coffee products. So it was all about how do you drive that revenue. Certainly we had cost targets we had to hit, but it's just positioning it such that you could achieve the ultimate success.
Do they make the full turnaround at Starbucks in your estimation?
Yeah. So I think, to your point, I think they lost a bit of discipline. I think what I enjoyed about Starbucks is they never rest. They're always looking to improve. And so, I think, I joined at the right time. I mean, whenever you do transformation work, you need to make sure you're set up for success, that leadership's on board, so on and so forth. Given where we were, for the very first time, negative comps, negative double-digit comps.
It's a rough time, 2009.
Very rough time.
Wow.
And so the desire was there to drive the value, to drive the transformation. I would say once we got over that hump, we were humming. Then it shifted back to the revenue. And I would say over time, some of those strategic cost models that we had put in place kind of degraded, because it just leaned so heavily towards driving the revenue and less on the cost side. But nonetheless, I mean, Starbucks, the success has been, it's well documented,
incredible,
obviously. And that model works when you have a high margin business, just like how do you expand as rapidly as you can, and how do you drive that revenue? And sourcing, by the way, supports driving the revenue side, not just the cost side. Like the relationships that you have with the food suppliers, as an example, syrup suppliers, so on and so forth.
So I want to get into Apollo now. Before we do, a quick Howard Schultz story. I'm at a conference 10 years ago, and he's going to be the keynote speaker at the morning breakfast. And I go for a run, and I got to go to shower and then come to the breakfast. And I'm starving, so I go to the breakfast first. It's already set up, and I get a bowl of whatever fruit, and I sit way in the bed. There's no one there yet in the conference room. So I'm sitting by myself. All of a sudden, there's a voice from behind me says, "Hey, you mind if I sit with you?" And I'm a sweaty mess. And it's Howard.
Yeah.
And he's there early because he wants to get set up and ready for a speech.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I'm meeting Howard Schultz, and I just like hell, I just run 5 miles. So
he's very dynamic.
It was great.
So easy to talk to.
He was great.
Such a brilliant businessman.
The funny part of the story is, it's like 2 years later, his book is coming out, and he's going to the 92nd Street Y in New York to give a talk.
Yeah.
Cab opens up. The guy gets out. It's him, and he's like, "Hey, where's the entrance for the 92nd Street Y?" I look at him and I go, "Conference in Park City, Utah. Guy, sweaty mess. You're giving the keynote at the breakfast, and you sit with him, even though he just went for a 5-mile run."
Yeah.
I go, me. He goes, "Oh my!" He remembered right away.
Yeah.
And we had a good laugh over it. But I had a great experience with him.
Yeah.
All right. So tell me. So let's get into Apollo. So it's a massive organization, right? So tell me about your organization and how are you structuring your team?
Yeah. We are very lean and mean. There's just 3 of us that we heavily rely on third parties, but we focus more on the strategy, making sure that we're set up for success. So our playbooks on how we do the engagements, capability assessments, things of that nature we're ultimately accountable to make sure that we're driving the right improvements within the organization so that they can drive their own success. So that's very critical. Obviously, your savings programs that you have, the partners that you have that drive that savings, leverage programs like I was mentioning in the Starbucks example. There's a lot of the very common categories where Apollo has incredible leverage. How do we put the right agreements in place for our companies to buy off of those contracts, Apollo type contracts? And then from an ongoing creating community, creating opportunities across portfolio companies, where can we go together and source?
But I guess, can I just jump in?
Yeah.
So, but I guess, how do you play, and do you play your traffic control with your portfolio companies and measuring their success or monitoring their performance?
Yeah.
So that, because I would imagine, when I was thinking about it last night, okay, so what's his role, right? So A, to bring value, new ideas to your portfolio companies, to your different CPOs. B, to try to get ahead of problems when you see something that may be amiss. And then C, to jump into the breach when something is broken or near broken, right? So I guess my question is, how do you, especially on number 2, how do you do that when there's 3 of you and you're trying to get ahead of problems that are maybe popping up in one of the portfolio companies?
Yeah. So I would say first and foremost, we're very clear on what the ultimate outcome is. We're private equity. We buy companies, we improve companies, and we sell companies for a profit. That's what we do, right? So what is our role in doing that? It's all about magnitude of cost takeout, magnitude of making sure you have the right suppliers doing the right things from a strategic perspective, or like a revenue growth perspective, as an example, so on and so forth. So in order to do that, the 3 people that I have, one is focused exclusively on benefits and insurance. It's such a specialized area of the business, requires expertise and a deep knowledge, and there's significant value associated with it, as well as impact to employees, right? So we have to get that right. The other person on my team focuses on more of the leveraged programs, working with portfolio companies to make sure they adopt those programs, and they'll also support holistically integration of the implementation plan, portfolio companies. And then I'm looking after all of it. How do we tweak strategies? I focus on the big portfolio companies. Obviously, I focus on supporting the CPOs that we put in place to make sure that they're continually driving the capability within their organization, that they're achieving the results, so on and so forth. So for us, success is pretty clear in that first year. So when we buy a company, we have a business plan that's associated with that acquisition. And there's very clear goals that we have to reach as a part of that business plan: revenue, cost, capability, so on and so forth. So the first,
so you know exactly how you're measuring success.
100%.
Okay.
And so that's the first year. The biggest thing that I've seen just within the PE industry in general is everybody focuses on hit that business case number, get that cost out. The challenge with that being your only focus, or primary focus even, is that you're going to own that asset another 4 or 5 years, right? And if you don't have the right capability in place and the right way to monitor to ensure that you're continually driving savings, that savings is going to dissipate quickly, and it's going to bounce back. It might even be higher. So it's very important, yes, to get those dollars out initially, but while you're doing that, set up that company for success. My number 1 job always has, always will be, make sure I got the right CPO in place. Because if you do that, everything else is so much easier. If you have the wrong one in place, life is long. I'll just put it that way, because you're battling over it. I mean, it just takes so much more effort to get to where you need to get to.
And that's the world of private equity and then venture to a certain extent, where I was coming partly from that world. I always said, like, the portfolio companies are like kids, and like me giving my son advice on his swing. Dad doesn't know anything.
Yeah.
But go out and get me a high-priced batting coach, and I give him the same advice. But he's a genius. So is that, I got to imagine when you were interviewing for the job, one of the things I'd be measuring is, all right, so how's this guy going to manage that? Because I think in the world that you live in, that's probably something you deal with every day.
It's absolutely a critical success factor. I think one of the one of the key criteria that my boss was looking for in the role was somebody who's been there, done that, that can relate to what these CPOs are going through within the companies. And not only the CPOs, but the key folks within their organization as well. So I think that's the number one success factor is we're there to support them, for them to be successful. Yes, at the end of the day, that's going to drive success for our shareholders, to our investors, which is my ultimate job, is to make sure that we deliver for them. How we do that is through those companies and through that leadership within the company. So make sure you have the right leader in place. If they're not the right leader, get the right leader in place. But then I'm there the whole way through, that I can support them as they navigate it. I can help them with business cases if they need investment, if there's good payback on that investment, so on and so forth. So I think relating to them, setting them up for success, showing them how it's differentiated. It wasn't something that you didn't do before and we're going to, jump on you because you didn't put this in place 2 years ago. It is a different game when Apollo acquires you. There's a whole set of capabilities that's available to you now that you should be taking advantage of to benefit your company. And so I think it's the positioning, it's the partnership with that leadership. I think that's the key to success.
So when it comes to talent, having the right CPO in place, being that you are, to me, the exception, not the rule, in that you actually knew what you wanted to do going way back to when you were in school. Do you have a bias when you're looking for a new CPO, let's say? Do you have a bias towards people who had that same experience where they knew what they wanted early on, or it doesn't really matter to you?
Yeah, I mean, experience, I think, factors into it, but I look more for capabilities within that individual. So there's, I think sourcing sometimes gets a bad rap because they want, the hard ass that can just really negotiate a good contract. It's so tactical, and they're a dime a dozen, to be honest with you. You have to have the panache to be able to do that, but yet you can relate to the business partners to make sure that you're sourcing the right thing with the right supplier, and that you're negotiating the right way, right? And so it really depends. Like I was mentioning with Starbucks, our food partners designed the food, manufactured the food, and we bought, the food from them. But you can't just steamroll them in a negotiation, right? When they're a key factor to driving revenue for your company, as an example. So I look for that person that can drive the deep relationships, that they have the learning agility to understand the business and the key aspects of that business that sourcing supports, that third parties support. But yes, they have that drive and that discipline to get the right cost for that scope of work. So I think it's absolutely critical to have that relationship component. You can't just be one dimensional and just, be a hard ass and driving a good negotiation.
So now, to get buy-in, I want to start getting buy-in. Yeah. When you've sort of got I'm not going to say a difficult CPO who's just like, you know what, I don't care if he's right. I do it my way, and I'm not right. So those people aren't going to last anyway. Right. But when you say this guy's a good guy, he's just being a little obstinate here, and I need to get buy-in here. What are some tactics? What are some things that you do? And where did you learn them from? What have you seen other large private equity firms do that you're like, I'm not doing that, or I like the way they do that. So what are some thoughts you have on that? Yeah,
I'll start briefly and talk about what I don't like, so I can spend all the time on what I do like. So I have seen other PE companies that are more forceful, I would just say. So, this is the number, you have to hit it. They just look to steamroll, if you will. But just a very dogmatic, direct sort of approach, not the relationship approach. They'll get that number, have a nice day. So I don't like that approach for many reasons. First and foremost, I don't think you get the best results that way. So you have what's in the business case that you have to hit. We always achieve above what we have in the business case. But I think partly because of the approach that we do take. So it is, yes, everybody knows what's in the business case, what we have to achieve, but it's let's really look at what the opportunity is above and beyond the business case, right? And so really understand the categories. How are you sourcing them today? Is it the right category strategy? Is it the right purchase, the right product, so on and so forth? So really walk through a methodical strategic sourcing process for every major category, and let's maximize our savings as well as supporting revenue. Because again, there's sometimes where you might invest in particular things that you're buying because it's going to help you on the revenue side. You might be able to charge more for the product, or it might have more reliability, or whatever the case may be. So it's better for the business overall. So we can't be so myopic on cost reduction. So first and foremost, what I like is taking that sort of partnership approach, aligning the CPO. They are the hero of the story every time. I'm putting them front and center with the deal team, with their own leadership team, the board in some cases, so that that person, they see that that's the person that drives it. We're just supporting them behind the scenes. They're the leader on the ground every day driving it. So as long as they see that and I support them in the right way, I think that's what gets the buy-in. To your point earlier, if they don't get that, or they're obstinate, or whatever the case may be, it's not going to work, right? And that individual is not going to work. But by and large, I've seen CPOs get on board, not all the time, but by and large, I think they typically get on board when they see that you're not there to beat on them, or you're not there just to hit a number, that you're really interested in the how, and you're interested in supporting them long-term and setting them up for success.
There are only a handful of asset managers / PE firms that I think are in the Apollo category, right?
Yeah.
And we know who they are. But it makes, it's more of a question, because, in other jobs I've had, it's always good to spend time with peers, right, who are sort of in the same role that you are. And, you get new ideas, you get different perspective, right? And it's not that you couldn't get the same perspective from someone in your role at a firm that was half the size of, which is still a big firm. But do you have the ability do you have a network that you can reach out to of other folks that are in similar positions at firms that are of similar size? And there's only a few of them.
Yeah. Yes, and it's broader. So, because I think we're such a big player, we buy all sizes of companies. We do focus on where the dollars are, but we need to have strategies to cover a vast majority of the portfolio, again, for the benefit of the investors. So I think PE is unique. Out of every industry I've been in, we compete and we don't. So we compete up to the time of acquisition. Post-acquisition, we're not really competing. And then there could be a strategic buy where you're working with them again, right? So I would say in that middle part, we are very collaborative. So you look at all the big firms and even the medium and small size firms, I would say typically every quarter we get together, just us as a group. And we talk about, the latest trends, what's happening in different categories. We talk about our partners, who's doing well, who's not, so on, what changes, acquisitions within partnerships, so on and so forth. I need somebody to look at sale leaseback. Who do you got? Who's done that work for you before, right? So a great point of reference for potential partners as well. So I think it's unique in that it's a very collaborative community. Certainly there's an aspect that we compete, but by and large, post-acquisition is when our biggest work happens, and we're very collaborative during that part. And I learned a lot from those.
I imagine you would.
And I think I have a different perspective than many of them because I come from industry. I didn't come from consulting, and a lot of those leaders come from consulting. Yeah. And so I think it's a good sharing of information. I think we learn from each other, and we're all better at making companies better because of our relationship.
So one of my interviews was with someone who had come out of a Fortune 100 company, and it was a CPG, and it was also food related. And I was asking about, which I want to hear from you about, what do you see now coming around the corner in this world of sourcing and procurement, especially with analytics and AI and whatnot. And some of the things that I especially during this interview, that they were doing with AI, and really trying to basically have a crystal ball, and saying, what are the inputs that go into our different food products, right? That there's, the shortage, the egg shortage, right? The cocoa shortage, and trying to predict what was going to be next year's thing that they needed to prepare for. And they were really measuring success and how effective they were at addressing these issues and using some big time analytics.
Yeah.
Is that something that you did before? Is that something you're doing more of now? Is it an eye opener for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the capability now is just so much more than it's ever been with AI, and it's tailor made for PE portfolios. Because if you think of the complexity of the spend, I mean, you're getting spend out of all these different systems. Like we have last count, I think it's 108 companies within the flagship portfolio, right? So we focus on the big ones. However, that's a lot of information. Even if you focus on like the top 40 or 50, that's a ton of information that you need to, one, extract from systems from those companies. Then how do you organize that data in a way that, from a PE perspective, you get a really good view of what that spend is and where the leverage opportunities are that you can bring from an Apollo perspective to support those companies. Without AI, I don't know if you could do it. I mean, you have to like throw an army at it to be able to do it. With AI, they can, ingest the data much more easily. They can collate that information so much more easily and make it a usable and put it in a usable format so we know where to attack to go get some cost savings. So I would say that's one huge aspect where it manages complexity incredibly well. The second is contracts. So this is something that we're embarking on of how do we get the contracts from a category and, learn within a company, where do we have great contracts and where do we have improvements? And we have that intelligence across all of our companies for, in particular categories that make them so much more powerful when they go to negotiate, having that information available to them. Payment terms. Why am I at net 15 when this guy has net 45, right? I know they can go to net 45. How do I get there? High tide lifts all boats. So it's like, how do we leverage the intelligence to make all of our portfolio companies better? That's where the AI comes in and our partnerships come in.
All right. So without telling tales out of school, my assumption is that at some point, right around the election, or maybe right after, someone says, okay, we're now in a new world. All right. Yeah. It's now the Trump world is different than the Biden world. And so in terms of getting ahead of issues and getting ahead of maybe not issues, but just changes in climate, right?
Yeah.
If the assumption is correct that M&A is going to pick up because Lena Khan is going to be gone from the FTC and the Trump administration is going to have a different view on M&A than Biden,
right?
Then I would say that I'd want my portfolio companies that are vintage, whatever, 3, 4, 5 years to start getting things in order, because, and maybe this is always the world of PE. You always should have your stuff, your ducks in a row in case that moment comes. But I would imagine my directive would be, hey, let's get ready for the new wave of transactions. That's one thing. And let's figure out how to mitigate the impact of tariffs. So 100%. JB, get to it and make sure our portfolio companies are ready.
Yeah.
That a correct assumption?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of scenario analysis. So what if China's 30% across the board? What if it's just for particular categories and it's 50%, so on and so forth? So you have to do all that scenario analysis so that when something comes down, you're ready, you know exactly what your game plan is going to be. And you have to put a lot of work in to be prepared for that, because you can't be behind it, because that's going to impact you significantly as a business. As an example, sometimes in tariffs, if it's hitting an industry like retail, let's just say, some of that cost you can pass on, right? Because it's hitting everybody, because some retail products are only made in China, or 90+% are made in China. Then there's the price elasticity of demand that you actually can't, because people just won't buy it. They're not going to pay it for that particular product, right? So you have to understand what the implications are going to be from that, and then what your game plan is. There's others where, yes, you're with China, somebody else you don't go with because they're 10%. But if tariffs are 30%, yes, you can go with them. How do we get a foothold there so that we can ramp up quickly if we have to. So it's just really understanding with all the different scenarios, how is it going to impact you as a business? And then what are you going to do to, right when it happens, you can pull the trigger and you're going to be ahead of your competition.
And I think one of the most common things I've heard from CPOs, especially larger companies, is as opposed to pre-COVID, a lot more time being spent. In fact, people being hired who have military experience in wargaming scenarios.
Yeah.
So I imagine, that's something are you doing that a lot more today than you did 10 years ago?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that scenario because that's what it.
So we'll keep Joe. So like when you go through different scenarios now, and I know there could be a ton of them, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of one that maybe is your most common nightmare when you're either daydreaming and saying, man, that one keeps me up at night thinking, this could really impact. Is there one in particular, or it's just the remnants of COVID that you think about?
It was forecasted. We have really good economists at Apollo as well that predict and have likely percentages behind scenarios, so on and so forth. So I felt like we had the base information we needed. I felt like we worked very well with our companies to understand those implications and putting together game plans behind it and really understanding implications to the company. So I wouldn't say anything necessarily keeps me up at night. There's certainly some scenarios that are more painful than others, like a blanket high tariff on everything coming out of China. That would be painful, but not only be painful for us, be painful for our competition. So in a way, it actually could be better for us because I feel like we're well prepared for something like that, as prepared, if not better prepared than any of the competition that we have. So maybe it's a net positive as an example, but that's the hardest work if something like that were to happen. But I feel pretty confident overall that we have the right game plans with the companies that would be impacted the most.
You're talking to yourself 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Or any young person who's just starting in sourcing, procurement, supply chain. What advice do you give them? And especially in light of everything we just talked about, how the world has changed, the industry has changed, the practice has changed. The people who, especially after COVID, sourcing the supply chain guys they went from the back of the room, now that they have a seat at the table. So what career advice would you have meant for just starting a career?
Yeah, I think it'd be different if I'm looking back 20 years to myself versus talking to someone starting out and sourcing today. Similar in that, do the work. I mean, do the analytics, do the scenario analysis, do the planning, look at things 6 ways to Sunday so you feel really good that you have plans in various contexts. It's actually easier today to do that because of technology. Because of AI and the support that you can get from AI that can collate information so much more quickly, can pull from different sources so much more quickly. So for this generation, it's embrace the technology to give yourself a leg up, or at least get yourself on the same footing. There's a lot of people that still don't embrace it, or they don't see the business cases related to AI. To me, they're pretty clear from a sourcing perspective, especially within PE, given the complexity. But use that as your foundational starting point. And then how do you iterate from that? Because AI obviously looks back. They don't look forward as much. It can predict. But you're always going to have that creativity going forward and looking at all the different angles based on that base context of information.
Would you tell them to learn the basics of crypto and digital currencies?
It's certainly talked about. So you need to understand the exchanges and how that's going to be executed. A lot of the platforms now are accepting crypto as an example. It's not broadly applicable to our businesses today, but you need to be prepared for that. To your point, I mean, that's one of the things you have to plan for. And if all of a sudden that our companies are going to be accepting crypto, who's our preferred platform? Can we get a preferred agreement in place for Apollo so that we can execute quickly on that? And we do have a partner that has that capability. We just haven't executed against it yet.
Last question, most bizarre thing you ever had to source and you're under the gun?
That's a great question. I would say probably tea matcha out of China. That's probably be, we were having issues with Japan supply. And when I was at Starbucks, and we had to quickly put something in place in China. And it was bizarre because the quality at that time, the quality differences between Japan and China were like unbelievable. But we had to make something happen. So it was bizarre in that, not necessarily the product, it's matcha, it's fine. But what we had to do to make it acceptable for Starbucks was a monumental effort to make it meet our standards. So like putting people in the facility, so on and so forth. But anyway, I would say that's what kind of comes to mind as the most unusual, bizarre, difficult in a lot of ways. Because it's, anytime you have a food product, I mean, people can die from food products, right? So it's pretty serious. And then you add on to that Starbucks, which we have very high standards for products. It was a lot of pressure. The other one I would say is when I lived in China, it was just the context of doing business in China. So we were opening. I lived there almost a year between Shanghai and Hong Kong. And
during what years?
That would have been 2012 and 13.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Hong Kong had already gone over, or when did?
Yeah, they'd already gone over, but not China didn't have the influence that they obviously do now. It was pretty much arm's length at that point in time. Hong Kong was more for the rest of Asia. Shanghai was for China. We were opening a store a day outside of China, a store a day in China. So working in China, when I first arrived, everything was sole sourced. And this is when we were moving from a global model to a regional model where you had regional CEOs, and they were driving that business from a store design standpoint, the food selection standpoint, so on and so forth. So what I was responsible for doing is setting up the supply chain to be able to support that growth. And they just do business very differently than in the US, especially in navigating the government. And so I'll just say that was another very unique, in ways frustrating, in ways fun, navigating through that, where, you'd have contracts, but contracts aren't like they are in the US, because guanxi is more important. Relationship is more important. So they could call you up and say, we're raising prices 10%. Are you going to accept, or do you want your shipment or no? And it's like, well, we have a contract. We have more guanxi. So it's like, fair enough. So if you want product in the store, you have to pay that increase. But what we did is, one, I was building out the team at the same time, is continuity of supply is the number one thing for sourcing. I don't care what the price is. If you can't guarantee that supply, that's a significant challenge. So we had to set up alternate sources for all of our different products. And then move away from the suppliers that, had lost our trust, let's just say.
Were you constantly getting advice on Foreign Corrupt Practices Acts and things like that? Because I know when I was in a role that I had, I was constantly giving advice to our folks in China, because lots of people have their hands out.
Yeah,
and
100%. Yeah. And stayed away from all that. We had a government relations arm of the business that navigated that for us. But whenever we encountered a situation like that, we had a very good support organization and turned it over to them, and they took it from there. But yeah, it was very fun, very interesting time to be in China. That's for sure.
Well, look, this has been great. Thanks for giving us a view into a day in the life, or in your life in general. And I wish you enormous success here. It's been great. I wish we had better weather, but thanks for having us down. And for all our listeners and viewers, thanks for joining us for this installment of Smarter Sourcing, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.